Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Welcome everyone to the class of biology. Today the class will be on chapter 11, Reproduction in Organisms. Today is the second part of it, and in the previous first class of this chapter we have discussed about types of plants based on the presence of male gametophyte and female gametophyte on the same plant. We have considered three types of plants. They are monoecious, dioecious, and bisexual plants. And then we have also discussed about the structure of an ideal flower, the components of it, and the functions of different wholes of a flower. And today, inshallah, we will discuss about a new concept called inflorescence, and then also the types of flowers based on their mode of pollination and the features of these different types of flowers. So, what is inflorescence? Inflorescence is the arrangement of a cluster of flowers on a stem. That means we see that from a stem, a shoot emerges that on which a multiple number of flowers are arranged in a specific manner. So a shoot that comes out from a stem that holds multiple number of flowers together in a certain fashion, in a certain arrangement. So this arrangement pattern is called inflorescence. So this inflorescence pattern or style may be of two types. One is racemose and the second one is cymose. Now in your book you have a figure. The left one, that is called racemose inflorescence, that is also called indefinite inflorescence, because the growth of this flower stalk is not definite. And on the right hand, a jasmine or belly dewy full flower, and this flower has cymose inflorescence, that is called also definite inflorescence, because the growth of the flower stalk is definite. After a certain growth, it doesn't grow taller more than that. So we will discuss about two types in detail. So at first, the racemose inflorescence, that is called indefinite. So at first we see the examples. Mustard and tuberose, these two flowers are example of racemose. And why that is called indefinite? Because the growth of main axis, that is peduncle means the flower stalk, and its growth is unlimited. That means its growth is not definite. The length of the peduncle or this flower stalk may be small, may be moderate, may be large, but it is not defined. And it has a certain style of flower blooming, that is called ascending flowering. That means the lower flowers on the stalk blooms first, and then consecutively the upper flowers they bloom one after another. So that is why in the mustard flower we see that the lower flowers on the flower stack, they have already bloomed up, fully grown, but at the top the flowers are not yet bloomed. So they are awaiting to be bloomed later on. And what happens is that the main axis is not blocked by any kind of flower. So the main axis is not blocked. We see that from the main axis sub branches are produced, but the main axis is not blocked. So the apical part is not blocked at all, so that the flower stalk can grow indefinitely. Also in case of tuberose, the lower flowers bloom first, and the upper flowers then consecutively bloom one after another. So that is why these two types of flowers are called indefinite inflorescence pattern. Now when we say about cymose, definite inflorescence, at first we see the examples. The examples are jasmine. So one kind of jasmine is belly, one kind of jasmine is Jui. So both are called jasmine. Now its growth is definite. Its growth of the main axis is limited. How? We see that from the stem a flower stalk has emerged. This green part, this flower stalk has emerged, that is called peduncle. And now this peduncle, the first flower blooms on this peduncle is on the main axis. So at the main axis, at the top of it, a flower blooms first, so that the main axis is blocked for further growth. And what happens then? Sub branches are produced from the bottom of the stem of the peduncle. So from the bottom of the peduncle, new flowers bloom, so that we see that on the floral axis, on the main axis, first a flower blooms, then after that new flowers emerges from the bottom of it, so that the length cannot increase, but its width can increase, but its length cannot increase further. So that is why we say, in case of also this flower main stalk floral axis, at first of it a flower is produced at the top, so that the main axis cannot grow long further. So then what happens? From the bottom of it, new flowers emerges. So, and this flowering style is called descending flowering, because at first the bottom flower is bloomed, then the new flowers emerges from bottom of it. So from top to bottom, the flowering style is from top and then consecutively to the bottom. That is why this flowering style is called descending flowering. An example is jasmine, we have said that earlier, Jui, Belly, etc. So now we will discuss about advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination. We know the concept very well, what is self-pollination and what is cross-pollination. We know that when pollen grains fertilize the ovum within the same plant, either within the same flower or of another flower within the same plant, this phenomenon will be called self-pollination. And when anther from one plant fertilizes, pollinates to other flower of other plant, this pollination is called cross-pollination. So now we will discuss about the advantages and disadvantages. So in self-pollination, there is less wastage of pollen, because within the same plant or within the same flower, maximum number of pollen can reach to the ovary of the same flower or of the same plant. So there is less wastage of pollen, while in cross-pollination most of the pollens fall around, they spread to the surrounding, but a small percentage of them can reach to the ovary of other flower of other plant. So there is high wastage. And in self-pollination, carrier is not required most often times, because with some small vibrations or by some small wind, it can be pollinated automatically. But for cross-pollination, the pollen has to travel much more farther. It has to travel a considerable amount of distance. So it essentially requires a carrier. And pollination is also uncertain, because carrier is specifically needed. And in self-pollination, genetic purity is maintained, because the pollen and the ovum, the male gamete and female gamete, comes from the same plant, so there is no genetic difference of the mother plant and the offspring plant. There is no genetic difference, so the genetic purity will be maintained. But in cross-pollination, characteristics from two different plants come in the offspring, so that its genetic purity is not maintained. It obtains some characteristics from the male gamete and obtains different characteristics from the female gamete. So there are the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination. And also, when we consider some other features in self-pollination, we see that in self-pollination there is less genetic diversity, because the offsprings will be identically cloned to the mother plant, so that there will be no genetic diversity. Will be no genetic difference from the mother and to the offspring plant. But in cross-pollination, there is high genetic diversity, because the offsprings produced by the mother plant offsprings will have different characteristics at different times, so that we will see that the offsprings produced at different times will be different in characteristics. So there is high genetic diversity. And as the self-pollinated organisms, self-pollinated plants have less genetic diversity, it has also less adaptation capacity. So there is higher chance to get extincted at adverse conditions. But in cross-pollinated plants, there is high variety and there is high variation among the offsprings, so that they have high adaptation capacity. So there is higher chance of survival in case of adverse conditions for the offsprings. And self-pollinated plants have less adaptation capacity, so they are vulnerable to species extinction, while the cross-pollinated plants have much more genetic diversity that leads to evolution of new species. So they can be considered as disadvantages and advantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now we will categorize flowers on their mode of pollination. At first we categorize some flowers as insect pollinated flowers. That means the flowers that pollinates using insects. So these flowers has some particular characteristics. For example, these flowers are usually large enough and they are scented and contain nectar, so that insects are attracted towards the flowers to get nectar from them. And they are also very colorful to attract the insects, and it contains pollens and stigma. Both of them are sticky. So we see that in case of an hibiscus plant, and hibiscus plant contains anthers, this yellow grain like parts, and these top parts, pink colored ovals are actually stigma of hibiscus flower. So we see that the stigma of hibiscus are sticky and thorny, so that when small pollen grains fall on the stigma, so they are attached together by the spikes, so they cannot be released from them, so they cannot leak from the surface of the stigma. So they are the usual features of insect pollinated flowers. And also pumpkin mustard, they are also insect pollinated flowers. And when in case of wind pollinated flowers, what are the characteristics? And they should be lightweight at first, so their anthers should also be lightweight, so that the pollens can travel long further by the help of wind. So they should be lightweight, and they don't have to carry scent or nectar, because as they are not insect pollinated, so they doesn't require to have scent or nectar with them. And they are also not colored, because they don't have to attract the insects, so they are not colored. And their stigma is sticky and branched. For example, we see that in case of a rice flower, inside the inflorescence of a rice flower, so inside the rice flower we see that these yellow ones are these yellow parts are anthers, and at the center of it contains ovary style stigma. So we see that stigma is sticky and feathery and branched, so that when pollen grains fall on them, it cannot get out of it, so it remains stick on the stigma, and pollination happens further. So as an example of wind pollinated flower, we can say rice. And In case of water pollinated flowers, for example, we here see that a aquatic plant called Vallisneria aquatic plant. Some people use them in aquarium as an aquarium plant, because that is aquatic. And these plants have male flowers on the male plant and female flowers on the female plant. So here we see the right one is the male flower. So it contains flowers that is short in size, and in the female plant it contains female flowers, which female flowers are long in size. So these flowers are lightweight and small, and they don't contain any scent or nectar, and they are not colored, and pedicel of female flowers are longer than that of male. And we see that also in case of it, the left one is male Vallisneria flower plant, and the male flower has a small pedicel, while the female flower has a long pedicel. And male flower detaches from pedicel when it matures and floats on water to reach to the female flower. So how it fertilizes? The staminate flowers or male flowers, when they matures, they are released from the pedicel and they floats upward. So they float with the stream current, and then eventually heats and reaches to the pistillate flower or female flower, and then pollinates the female flower. So here we see that the male flowers, they're released from the pedicel and floats in the water surface, and then eventually reaches to the female flower and then fertilizes it and pollinates it. And then the last one, we call them animal pollinated flowers. So as an example of it, we say kodum and shimul and taro, that means kochu gaser phul. So what are their features? Usually these flowers are large in size. If they're small, then they're arranged in an inflorescence. So the inflorescence contain multiple number of small flowers, and scent may be present or may be absent in these flowers, and they have attractive color. We see the shimul flower is very red bright in color, that is very much attractive, and also kodum flower. And example of them is kodum, shimul, or taro, that means kochu. So in the taro plant, kochu plant, they are the long leaves, and the yellow part you see actually the flowers of it. So that is the kochu flower. So what we have actually learned about different types of plants categorized on the basis of mode of pollination. So some flowers are insect pollinated, some are wind pollinated, some are water pollinated, and some are animal pollinated. And these four categories of flower has different type of features. For their adaptation purpose, they have different features. And today we have also learned about what is called inflorescence. We have discussed about cymose and racemose inflorescence, definite and indefinite inflorescence, and there are some differences between them also. So today your homework is write down the differences between self-pollination and cross-pollination, and also compare the features between flowers that are insect pollinated, wind pollinated, water pollinated, and animal pollinated. So, no more today. সবাই ভালো থাকো ইনশাআল্লাহ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।